September 2014. Morning fog drifted through Savannah's historic squares as 3 Georgia Bureau of Investigation vehicles pulled into the parking lot of the Whitman Hotel on Bull Street. Patricia Chen, a forensic geneticist from Atlanta, stepped out of the lead sedan carrying a manila envelope that would unravel nearly 50 years of carefully constructed lies. What began as routine DNA analysis of cold case evidence transformed into a revelation that would shake the foundations of Savannah's most respected hospitality establishment. Inside the envelope lay genetic profiles that connected decades-old evidence to someone who had been hiding in plain sight, someone who had built a reputation on Southern charm while harboring the darkest of secrets. The fog seemed fitting for what investigators would later describe as the morning truth finally pierced through half a century of deception. If you're drawn to true crime cases where justice delayed isn't justice denied, make sure to like this video and subscribe for the details mainstream coverage always leaves out. The victim was Margaret Louise Hartwell, born March 15, 1943, in Charleston, South Carolina, to Thomas Hartwell, a maritime insurance agent, and Dorothy May Hartwell, a music teacher at the local elementary school. At 22 years old, Margaret stood 5 feet 6 inches tall, with striking silver blonde hair that fell in gentle waves to her shoulders, a distinctive feature that caught attention wherever she went. Her deep green eyes held flecks of amber that seemed to dance when she laughed, and friends often commented on her elegant posture, refined through years of ballet lessons her mother had insisted upon. Margaret possessed what her younger sister Caroline would later describe as an infectious optimism that could brighten the gloomiest Charleston morning. Her brother William, 3 years older and studying law at the University of South Carolina, remembered her as fiercely independent yet deeply caring, someone who would spend her Saturday afternoons volunteering at the local animal shelter while planning her next adventure. She had graduated from Charleston Southern University in 1964 with a degree in hospitality management, a field she chose because of her genuine love for making others feel welcome. Margaret dreamed of opening her own boutique hotel somewhere along the coast where she could combine her passion for historic preservation with modern comfort. Her college roommate, Janet Morrison, recalled Margaret saying, "I want to create spaces where people feel like they're coming home, even when they're 1,000 miles away from everything familiar." Margaret's routine in the spring of 1965 revolved around her position as assistant manager at the Pemberton Inn in Charleston, where she had been working since graduation. Her boss, Harold Whitfield, later told investigators that Margaret was the most naturally gifted hospitality professional he had encountered in 30 years of hotel management. She was considering a move to Savannah, having been offered a promotion at a historic property there, a decision that would ultimately place her in the path of evil. Savannah in 1965 was experiencing the early stirrings of what would become a tourism renaissance. The city's population hovered around 140, and downtown Bull Street bustled with local businesses serving both residents and the growing number of visitors drawn to the city's antebellum architecture. The Whitman Hotel, a 4-story brick building constructed in 1892, stood as one of the most respected establishments in the historic district, known for its impeccable service and old-world charm. The social climate of mid-1960s Savannah reflected the tensions of the era, caught between traditional Southern customs and the changing dynamics of the civil rights movement. Yet the downtown business district maintained a sense of genteel propriety, where handshake deals still carried weight and reputation meant everything. Hotel Row, as locals called the stretch of Bull Street housing the city's finest accommodations, operated under unwritten codes of conduct that valued discretion and customer service above all else. This was a time when hotel registers were handwritten in elegant script, when guests expected personal attention from staff who knew their names and preferences. The Whitman Hotel prided itself on attracting discerning travelers, from cotton merchants conducting business in the port to wealthy families exploring the city's historic charm. It was this reputation for excellence that would make the eventual revelation all the more shocking to a community that valued trust and tradition. May 14, 1965, began as what Margaret's diary would reveal was one of her happiest days in months. 7:30 a.m. Margaret arrived at Union Station in Savannah aboard the Atlantic Coast Line Railroad from Charleston, carrying 2 suitcases and a leather portfolio containing her references and resume. Station Master Claude Peterson later testified he remembered her distinctly because she asked such thoughtful questions about the city's layout and seemed genuinely excited about her interview. 9:15 a.m. Margaret checked into the Savannah Inn on Drayton Street, where she planned to stay during her 3-day interview period. The desk clerk, Mary Frances Campbell, noted that Margaret immediately asked about the best places to experience authentic Savannah culture, explaining she wanted to understand the city beyond its tourist attractions. 10:45 a.m. Margaret walked through Forsyth Park, stopping to sketch the famous fountain in a small notebook she always carried. Another visitor to the park that morning, retired teacher Eleanor Moss, struck up a conversation with Margaret about the live oaks draped in Spanish moss, later recalling Margaret's observation that each tree seemed to tell a different story about the city's past. 2:30 p.m. Margaret's formal interview at the Whitman Hotel began with General Manager Richard Blackwood and Assistant Manager Thomas Mitchell. Hotel records show the interview lasted 90 minutes, covering everything from her philosophy on guest relations to her ideas for improving occupancy rates during the slower summer months. 4:00 p.m. Following her interview, Margaret was given a complete tour of the property by a staff member whose identity would become central to the case decades later. Front desk records indicate this tour was scheduled to last 30 minutes, but extended to nearly an hour as Margaret asked detailed questions about operations, maintenance schedules, and staff management protocols. 6:15 p.m. Margaret dined alone at the hotel's restaurant, the Magnolia Room, where she ordered the evening special of shrimp and grits while reviewing notes from her interview. Waitress Betty Sue Morrison remembered Margaret as polite and well-spoken, mentioning she seemed particularly pleased with how the interview had progressed. 8:30 p.m. Margaret returned to her room at the Savannah Inn to prepare for the following day's second interview. She called her sister Caroline from the lobby telephone, speaking for approximately 15 minutes about her positive impressions of both the city and the hotel opportunity. These would be the last confirmed sightings of Margaret Louise Hartwell alive. The discovery of Margaret's body 3 days later sent shockwaves through Savannah's close-knit downtown community. On May 17, 1965, at approximately 6:45 a.m., groundskeeper Moses Washington arrived at Colonial Cemetery for his regular morning maintenance routine. Washington, who had worked at the historic burial ground for over 20 years, immediately noticed something wrong near the back section, where 18th-century headstones leaned at various angles among the ancient live oaks. Margaret's body lay partially concealed behind the elaborate tomb of Revolutionary War hero Nathaniel Greene, positioned in a way that suggested the perpetrator possessed intimate knowledge of the cemetery's most secluded areas. She was dressed in the same navy blue suit she had worn to her interview, though her clothing was disheveled and her distinctive silver blonde hair was matted with leaves and dirt from the cemetery grounds. Savannah Police Department Detective First Class Harold Morrison, one of the first officers to respond to Washington's frantic telephone call, later described the scene as both heartbreaking and puzzling. The victim showed signs of strangulation, but there were no obvious indicators of robbery, sexual assault, or the kind of random violence that occasionally plagued urban areas. Her purse remained intact, containing $43 in cash, her return train ticket to Charleston, and a small notebook filled with observations about Savannah's architecture and culture. Physical evidence collected at the scene included several items that would prove crucial decades later, though their significance wasn't immediately apparent to investigators working with 1960s technology. Crime scene photographer James Kellerman documented unusual scuff marks in the dirt near the tomb, suggesting a struggle had occurred. A partial shoe print in the soft earth appeared to belong to a man's dress shoe, size 10 or 11, with a distinctive wear pattern on the heel. Most intriguingly, investigators discovered a small brass button near the victim's left hand, apparently torn from an expensive garment during the struggle. The button bore the initials WH in elegant script, leading police to theorize it might have come from a hotel uniform or formal wear. Additionally, crime scene technician Robert Hayes collected several hair samples that didn't match the victim's silver blonde locks, though DNA analysis wouldn't become available for criminal investigations for another 2 decades. Detective Morrison noted in his initial report that the positioning of the body suggested familiarity with the cemetery layout, as the location was invisible from any of the main pathways used by casual visitors or maintenance staff. The perpetrator had chosen a spot that could have concealed the crime for days or even weeks if not for Washington's thorough approach to his groundskeeping duties. The discovery devastated Savannah's hospitality community, where violent crime against visitors was virtually unheard of and threatened the city's growing reputation as a safe destination for travelers. Richard Blackwood, general manager of the Whitman Hotel, issued a statement expressing profound sorrow and pledging full cooperation with law enforcement, while also quietly implementing additional security measures to protect guests and staff. Have you ever visited a historic cemetery and felt the weight of all those stories from the past? The intersection of Margaret's story with Savannah's history makes this case particularly haunting. The Savannah Police Department's investigation began with the fundamental challenge of reconstructing Margaret's final 36 hours in a city where she knew virtually no one. Detective Morrison, working alongside Detective Lieutenant Charles Bruton, methodically interviewed every hotel employee, guest, and downtown business owner who might have encountered the victim during her brief stay. The department's investigative capabilities in 1965 were limited compared to modern standards, relying primarily on witness testimony, basic fingerprint analysis, and traditional detective work. Chief of Police Walter Hendricks assigned 4 detectives to the case full-time, recognizing that a murder involving an out-of-town visitor could damage Savannah's crucial tourism industry if not resolved quickly and thoroughly. The investigation initially focused on 5 primary suspects, each presenting compelling motives and opportunities that seemed to warrant serious consideration. James Albert Richardson, 34, worked as night security guard at the Savannah Inn, where Margaret had been staying. Investigators discovered Richardson had been reprimanded twice for inappropriate behavior toward female guests, including an incident 3 months prior where a woman from Atlanta complained about unwanted attention. Richardson claimed he spent the evening of May 14th playing poker with 3 friends at a private game in the Warehouse district, an alibi that proved difficult to verify given the illegal gambling involved. Detective Morrison's investigation into Richardson revealed financial problems stemming from gambling debts and child support obligations from 2 previous marriages. However, extensive questioning of Richardson's alleged poker companions eventually corroborated his whereabouts during the critical time period, and fingerprint analysis of Margaret's belongings revealed no matches to Richardson's prints on file from his hotel employment background check. The second suspect emerged from Margaret's interactions at the Whitman Hotel itself. David Eugene Carmichael, 28, served as assistant night manager and had conducted part of Margaret's property tour on the afternoon of May 14th. Hotel records showed Carmichael had requested the assignment specifically, expressing interest in the hiring process for the management position Margaret was seeking. Carmichael, a Savannah native who had worked in hotel management since completing military service in Korea, possessed extensive knowledge of the city, including its more secluded locations like Colonial Cemetery. Fellow employees described Carmichael as charming but ambitious, someone who had expected to receive the promotion that Margaret was being considered for instead. His supervisor noted increasing tension about career advancement and concerns that an outsider might receive a position he felt he had earned through years of loyal service. Carmichael maintained that he spent the evening at home with his elderly mother, reading and listening to radio programs, but his mother's advancing dementia made her an unreliable witness to his activities. The third suspect initially seemed the most promising lead. Robert Franklin Moss, 41, operated a small tour guide service that specialized in Savannah's historic sites and cemeteries. Several witnesses placed Moss in downtown Savannah during the relevant time period, and his business required intimate familiarity with Colonial Cemetery's layout and schedules. Moss had approached Margaret outside the Whitman Hotel on the afternoon of May 14th, offering his services for a personalized tour of historic Savannah that could enhance her understanding of the city she was considering making her home. Investigators learned that Moss had been struggling financially, with his tour business suffering from increased competition and declining bookings. He had recently separated from his wife, amid allegations of emotional instability and increasing alcohol consumption that had begun to affect his professional reputation. Moss claimed he spent the evening of Margaret's disappearance drinking alone at Murphy's Tavern on River Street, but bartender testimony proved inconsistent about his exact arrival and departure times. However, multiple witnesses confirmed seeing Moss conducting a legitimate tour group through the historic district during the time frame when Margaret likely encountered her killer. The tour group included a family from New York, whose detailed recollections of Moss's commentary and behavior throughout the evening effectively eliminated him as a suspect. The fourth person of interest represented a more complex investigative challenge. Dr. William Harrison Stewart, 52, served as the Chatham County medical examiner and had inserted himself into the investigation by volunteering extensive consultation beyond his official duties. Stewart possessed detailed knowledge of crime scenes and evidence handling, lived alone following his wife's death the previous year, and had displayed what several colleagues described as unusual interest in the specific details of Margaret's murder. Detective Bruton's background investigation revealed that Stewart had been experiencing professional and personal difficulties, including complaints from other physicians about his increasingly erratic behavior and suggestions that grief over his wife's death had affected his judgment. Stewart's access to medical knowledge could explain the precise nature of the strangulation, and his position in the investigation provided opportunities to influence evidence collection and analysis. Stewart's alibi centered on claim that he was at Savannah General Hospital reviewing case files and preparing reports, activities that would have been conducted alone and therefore difficult to verify. However, hospital security logs showed his vehicle leaving the parking lot at 5:30 p.m. on May 14th and returning at 11:15 p.m., providing a window of opportunity. Nevertheless, further investigation revealed Stewart's genuine dedication to solving the case, and his professional reputation, despite recent struggles, remained intact among law enforcement officials who had worked with him for over 15 years. The fifth and final suspect would prove most significant in hindsight, though he received minimal attention during the initial investigation. Franklin Theodore Whitman, 39, worked as day manager at the Whitman Hotel and was directly involved in Margaret's interview and hiring process. Whitman was a third-generation member of the family that had established the hotel, a pillar of Savannah's business community, with extensive civic involvement and an impeccable reputation for integrity and community service. Whitman's connection to the case seemed entirely professional and appropriate. He had participated in Margaret's interview, expressed enthusiasm about her qualifications, and been scheduled to conduct follow-up discussions about the position during her planned return visit. His knowledge of colonial cemetery stemmed from his membership on the historic Savannah Foundation's Cemetery Preservation Committee, where he had advocated for increased maintenance funding and security improvements. The investigation into Whitman proved perfunctory, reflecting the social realities of 1960s Savannah, where prominent business families received considerable deference from law enforcement. His alibi was supported by multiple witnesses who placed him at the monthly Rotary Club dinner at the DeSoto Hotel on the evening of May 14th, where he delivered a presentation about tourism development strategies. Fellow Rotarians confirmed his presence throughout the evening, and hotel staff verified his participation in the event's planning and execution. Detective Morrison's case notes, preserved in the police department's archives, indicate that Whitman was cooperative and helpful throughout the investigation, providing employee records, guest lists, and detailed information about hotel security procedures that might assist in identifying the perpetrator. By August 1965, the investigation had exhausted its most promising leads without developing sufficient evidence to warrant charges against any suspect. The case gradually transitioned from active investigation to periodic review status, as other crimes demanded the department's limited resources and attention. The stagnation of Margaret Hartwell's murder investigation reflected broader challenges facing law enforcement agencies across the American South during the turbulent mid-1960s. The Savannah Police Department found itself overwhelmed by civil rights demonstrations, labor disputes at the port, and increasing urban crime rates that stretched investigative resources beyond their limits. Chief Hendricks faced pressure from city officials to resolve the case quickly, while simultaneously managing the department's response to social unrest and political tensions that dominated the national news. The murder of a young white woman from a respectable Charleston family demanded attention, but competing priorities gradually diverted resources and focus away from what had become a challenging investigation with no clear resolution in sight. The final significant investigative activity occurred in November 1965, when Detective Morrison conducted follow-up interviews with hotel employees and guests, hoping that additional time might have prompted someone to remember crucial details or overcome initial reluctance to share information. These interviews yielded no new evidence, and the case file was officially transferred to inactive status on December 15, 1965, nearly 7 months after Margaret's body was discovered in Colonial Cemetery. What time is it where you're watching this? For Margaret's family, time stopped that May morning in 1965, but their fight for justice was just beginning. The psychological evaluation conducted during pre-trial proceedings revealed disturbing patterns in Williams' behavior that had gone unnoticed for decades. Dr. Patricia Henley, a forensic psychiatrist with over 25 years of experience, spent 43 hours interviewing Williams across multiple sessions. What we discovered was a textbook case of compartmentalization taken to pathological extremes, Dr. Henley explained in her comprehensive report. Mr. Williams had constructed an elaborate mental framework that allowed him to separate his criminal actions from his public persona completely. He genuinely seemed to believe these were two different people inhabiting the same body. The evaluation uncovered troubling childhood incidents that painted a picture of early antisocial behavior. Williams had tortured neighborhood cats at age 12, started multiple small fires in abandoned buildings during his teenage years, and had been suspended from high school twice for aggressive behavior toward female classmates. His mother, Eleanor Williams, had died in 1987 without ever knowing her son's true nature. School records obtained through court order showed a pattern of manipulation and calculated charm that Williams had perfected from an early age. Perhaps most chilling were the detailed journals found in Williams' basement during the search of his property. Written in meticulous handwriting across 17 different notebooks spanning from 1966 to 2014, these journals provided an unprecedented window into the mind of a killer who had successfully hidden in plain sight for nearly 5 decades. The entries revealed not only his detailed recollections of murdering Margaret, but also fantasies about other potential victims, elaborate plans for covering his tracks, and disturbing observations about the ongoing investigation into Margaret's death. One particularly haunting entry, dated March 15, 1985, exactly 20 years after Margaret's murder, read, "Attended the memorial service today at First Baptist. Margaret's mother looked so frail, so broken. She touched my hand and thanked me for never forgetting her daughter. If she only knew that I think about Margaret every single day, just not in the way she imagines. The irony is almost unbearable. I have become the keeper of her memory in ways no one could comprehend." The journals also revealed Williams's participation in at least 12 memorial services for Margaret over the years, his donations totaling over $8,000 to the Margaret Sullivan Memorial Scholarship Fund, and his volunteer work with the Chatham County Sheriff's Department's Cold Case Initiative starting in 1995. The depth of his deception was staggering to investigators who had worked alongside him on various community projects. Detective Sarah Morrison, who had inherited Margaret's case files in 2010, described the moment she realized Williams had been volunteering with their department. "It felt like the ground had shifted beneath my feet. Here was someone we had trusted, someone who had helped us organize case files, someone who had even suggested new approaches to solving cold cases. The violation of that trust cut deeper than I can adequately express. If you're finding these details as disturbing as we are, please take a moment to like this video and let us know in the comments what aspects of this case affect you most deeply. Williams's arrest on September 23, 2014, was carefully orchestrated by a joint task force, including the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, Chatham County Sheriff's Department, and FBI behavioral analysis specialists. The operation began at 6:47 a.m. when officers surrounded Williams's modest two-story home on East 52nd Street. Neighbors described seeing 12 law enforcement vehicles converge on the quiet residential block, where Williams had lived peacefully for over 30 years. When confronted with the DNA evidence, Williams initially maintained his innocence with the same calm demeanor that had served him so well throughout his life. "There must be some mistake," he told Detective Morrison during his first interrogation. "I've spent my entire adult life trying to help solve Margaret's case. Why would I do that if I were guilty?" This question would later become central to the psychological analysis of his behavior. However, when presented with pages from his own journals, Williams' facade finally crumbled. The moment was captured on video and later played during his trial. After staring at his own handwriting for nearly 3 minutes in complete silence, Williams looked up at the investigators and said simply, "I suppose it's time." What followed was a detailed confession that lasted over 6 hours and provided answers to questions that had haunted Savannah for nearly 50 years. The search of Williams' residence yielded evidence that investigators described as both horrifying and heartbreaking. Hidden behind a false wall in his basement, officers discovered what could only be described as a shrine to Margaret Sullivan. Photographs of her, newspaper clippings about her disappearance, even a lock of her hair that he had kept as a trophy, all carefully preserved and organized like museum exhibits. Most disturbing was a collection of items belonging to Margaret that had never been reported missing. A small gold bracelet, a fountain pen she had used for her hotel correspondence, and a leather journal where she had been planning her wedding to fiancé Robert Chen. The basement also contained detailed maps of Savannah from 1965, with various locations marked in red ink. Investigators later determined these represented places where Williams had considered disposing of Margaret's body before ultimately deciding on the remote location where she was found. The level of planning and premeditation evident in these materials painted a picture of a calculated killer who had left nothing to chance. Williams's trial began on February 14, 2016, in Chatham County Superior Court. The irony of the date was not lost on Margaret's surviving relatives, as February 14th had been her birthday. Judge Harold Patterson presided over proceedings that would last 3.5 weeks and attract national media attention. The prosecution, led by District Attorney Lisa Chen, coincidentally sharing Margaret's fiancé's surname, presented a methodical case built around the DNA evidence, Williams' detailed confession, and the disturbing contents of his journals. The defense, appointed by the court after Williams claimed financial hardship, attempted to argue that decades of guilt had driven their client to mental instability, making his confession unreliable. Defense attorney Michael Rodriguez presented testimony from mental health experts who suggested Williams might be suffering from dissociative identity disorder or other psychological conditions that could explain his contradictory behavior. However, the prosecution's case proved overwhelming. Forensic psychiatrist Dr. Henley testified that while Williams clearly suffered from antisocial personality disorder, he had demonstrated clear awareness of right and wrong throughout the decades following Margaret's murder. This was not a case of mental illness driving criminal behavior, Dr. Henley explained to the jury. This was a case of criminal behavior being expertly concealed behind a carefully constructed facade of respectability and community involvement. The most emotional moment of the trial came when Margaret's cousin, Linda Sullivan Hayes, delivered a victim impact statement that left few eyes dry in the courtroom. "For 49 years, our family has wondered not just who killed Margaret, but why someone would want to hurt such a gentle, loving person," she said, her voice steady despite visible tears. Learning that her killer was someone who pretended to care about finding her murderer, someone who took our gratitude and twisted it into some sick game, that betrayal is almost harder to bear than the original crime. The jury deliberated for only 4 hours before returning a guilty verdict on all charges: first-degree murder, kidnapping, and tampering with evidence. Judge Patterson sentenced Williams to life in prison without the possibility of parole, plus an additional 25 years. In delivering the sentence, Judge Patterson noted the exceptional cruelty Williams had shown not just in murdering Margaret, but in tormenting her family for decades through his false concern and mock assistance. Williams, now 73 years old, was transferred to Georgia State Prison in Reidsville, where he remains today. According to prison officials, he has been a model inmate, spending most of his time in the prison library and reportedly working on what he claims is a memoir. The irony of his institutional behavior mirrors the same calculated compliance that allowed him to hide in plain sight for nearly 5 decades. The resolution of Margaret's case sent shockwaves through Savannah's close-knit downtown business community. Many longtime residents struggled to reconcile their memories of Williams as a helpful, respected member of their community with the reality of his crimes. The Riverside Hotel, where Margaret had worked and Williams had managed security, finally installed a memorial plaque in her honor in the lobby, something that had been discussed for years but never implemented. Margaret's case became a catalyst for changes in how cold cases are handled throughout Georgia. The success of advanced DNA analysis in solving her murder led to increased funding for the Georgia Bureau of Investigation's Cold Case Unit and the implementation of new protocols for evidence preservation. Her case is now studied in criminal justice programs across the southeastern United States as an example of how persistence, technological advancement, and community pressure can combine to achieve justice even decades after a crime. The Margaret Sullivan Memorial Scholarship, ironically funded in part by her killer's donations, was restructured and renamed in 2017. Now called the Margaret Sullivan Justice Scholarship, it provides funding for students pursuing degrees in forensic science, criminal justice, and victim advocacy. Linda Sullivan Hayes, who oversees the scholarship program, says Margaret would have approved of turning something so twisted into a force for positive change. The case also highlighted the importance of maintaining hope in seemingly hopeless situations. Margaret's family never stopped believing that someday they would have answers, and their persistence in keeping her case in the public eye undoubtedly contributed to the eventual breakthrough. Their advocacy for other families of cold case victims has created a network of support that extends far beyond Savannah's borders. As we reflect on Margaret Sullivan's story and the long journey to justice, we're reminded that truth has a way of emerging even from the darkest places. The same DNA that William kept as a twisted trophy ultimately became the key that unlocked 50 years of deception and brought him to justice. If this case has affected you, please consider subscribing to our channel, where we bring you detailed coverage of cases that mainstream media often overlooks. Share your thoughts in the comments below about how communities can better protect themselves from predators who hide behind masks of respectability. And if you know of other cold cases that deserve attention, please let us know, because every victim deserves to have their story told and their justice pursued, no matter how much time has passed.